another story, Grandmother's Gift, Sue Morton.
Oh, thank you, Julie. We discovered yesterday that we are one person. We are, yeah. She's taller and better looking and a lot younger than I am, but it's just we're always on that same plane. It's really weird. Well, thank you for inviting me. I originally thought I was telling a story to folks with dementia. And so I took my grandmother's gift story and I narrowed it down into a smaller story. But I'm going to insert a little bit more because I want to share something with you that I might not have shared with them. So my grandmother Carruthers, her name was Ollie Harriet, which I always thought was an unusual name. But I love it because it's unusual. Was a very stoic woman. She was an extremely hard worker. And she just relished a job well done. She and my grandfather owned a grocery store that had started as a huckster's wagon and ended up in the city of Kokomo, Indiana for 57 years. It was a Clover Farm grocery, a little tiny store, not unlike the one we have in Cottonwood up until a few years ago. The first time I walked into that store in Cottonwood, the nostalgia just slapped me in the face. We're just shopping back. Grandmother went to work at 5:30 every morning. She left at noon and went home and prepared a meal and brought it back for my grandfather and my great-uncle. And then she worked until the end of the day, and they were home by about 7, where she again fixed another meal, hand-cleaned the house, did all her chores, took care of the dogs they raised, picked the grapes, and made the wine. I mean, she just relished hard work. And she was also somewhat of a perfectionist. Whereas my other grandmother would have all 12 grandchildren over to dip chocolates and jump on the bed, Grandmother Carruthers had one grandchild at a time visit her. So Grandmother Carruthers gave me my gifts. She gave me the love of the earth and the caring and the stewardship of the earth. She gave me the love of mathematics. Now, I ended up being an English teacher, but my sole goal was to be a math professor at one time until I met up with a professor that said women didn't belong here. That's a whole nother story, and it's not a very pleasant one. So, she also gave me the gift of patience. I would stay all night at Grandma's house. And she would let me, brush her hair. Grandmother was tall, beautiful woman. Long, beautiful white hair that she parted down the middle that came down here. But nobody knew that, but I knew it. Because she got up every morning and she braided it in long braids. And then she wrapped it around her head. And everyone knew her with her braids wrapped around her head. But when I stayed all night, she would sit down on the edge of her bed and reach for that brush, that hairbrush, that laid on the chaperone that my grandfather had made just for her. And she would hand it to me. And she would undo her braids. And I would brush her hair. Top all the way to the bottom, she would say, for healthy hair. And you know the rest of that story. 100 strokes. 1, 2, 3. So we counted. And we learned to love those numbers. And then the next morning we would get up, and she would bring out the button jar. And she would dump that button jar on the dining room table. And it was my job to sort those buttons into piles that matched each other. All the white ones that were exactly alike. Those 3 little purple ones. The one that had gold on it. And then we would count each pile. Again, numbers, she said, were very important. If you're going to run a house and you're going to operate a grocery store, you need to know your numbers. And then we would cut cardboard pieces that those matching buttons would fit on. She would hand me a needle and a thread. And she taught me, too, how to sew buttons back on to where they had left. So numbers were important to her. She was a brilliant woman. Got married when she was 16. Quit school after the 6th grade. That was pretty normal. She was born in 1867, so we're looking way back in time. She was old when I knew her as a little girl. If she had been given that opportunity to move forward in her education, she would have been a PhD someplace, probably in medicine because she loved nursing people. But those opportunities were available to her. She made the most of everything she had. She also taught me the love of the earth. You know, I caught myself the other day, and there's things that I do every single day that remind me of Grandmother Crothers. And I was rinsing the dishes and putting them in the dishwasher, and we had leftovers that night, so I had a piece of aluminum foil, or as we called it back in the day, tin foil. Did anybody else call it tin foil? Mm-hmm. Had covered the leftover dish. And without any thought, I took the tin foil, and I washed it in soapy water, and I laid it out, smoothed it all out, and I hung it over the faucet to dry after I rinsed it. Mm-hmm. Because as Grandmother said, when I would stand on the milking stool at the kitchen sink with her, what a waste to use a piece of tinfoil only one time. Mm-hmm. It's perfectly good. Why put that back into the trash and into the earth? Back in 1952, before the words recycle and reuse were even coined, she was doing everything she could to repurpose and reuse. So she taught me the love of the earth and the stewardship that was needed to care for it. And she taught me patience. By the time I was 16, and every single grandchild was 16, we were all working at the grocery store. I worked as a cashier, and our adding machine was this little machine like this. Now, I have never figured out how this actually added and calculated, because I'm telling you, it was not digital, it was not electronic. So it had to be in the way the numbers were, I don't know. It doesn't matter, it worked. So you would take your figure, and for every single item, you would put in the number, the cost, $1.67. Oops, forgot the decimal point, 1.67. Mm-hmm. 0.28. Every single item. And then you would hit subtotal, and then you would hit total, and there you had your total on a strip of paper. Well, I challenged myself, being a very, very competitive person, to see how fast I could do this. Good customer service, get it done now. So, and Grandmother worked as a cashier a lot. When I worked as a cashier, we were working together. I was boom. I was good. I was really, really fast. But what she noticed is that I wasn't very accurate. And she, what was really interesting is that she would say, you've got to take care of your customer, and getting it right is part of that. And she was never, ever angry with me. She would say, what you need to do is slow down, Susan. She said that to me a lot of times when I was running up the steps. Slow down, Susan. I heard that a lot. She would say, take your time, be patient, get it right. Because you're going to grow up to be a mom and a wife, and you're going to need your patience. And she never let me get away with it. Every time she would say, slow down. And I would, for a while. And if I sped up, she was there to help me with that. And of course, I've used that patience throughout my life. I've become extremely patient individual. And that's part of my grandmother that's with me. But let me tell you something else about my grandmother. My grandmother was a paranoid schizophrenic. She would open the refrigerator and she would scream and say, somebody has traded a half a jar of mustard for the brand new jar I just bought. Or she would run to the window and close the curtains in the middle of the day because somebody was watching her. She would, in that schizophrenia, become somebody else. And it was not infrequent when my grandfather would have scratches down his face and his arm. because she would become violent. An entirely different person she would be. Well, we loved her dearly, and my grandfather was a saint. He adored her. He never left her. He always took care of her. Whether she was good, whether she was in a bad way. Didn't matter where she was in her life. She was his love of his life. She had treatment down in Indianapolis when she was fairly young, and electronic stimulation and all of that she went through. And finally, in the early 70s, they came up with medication, which did benefit her to some extent, but it wasn't perfect. So she still had good days, and she still had bad days, but she was still loved, and she still loved us dearly. And my 3 little sisters don't ever remember staying all night at grandmother's house. They missed that because she just wasn't well. Well, she eventually became ill, and dementia set in along with the paranoid schizophrenia. And she laid in bed for a while and finally passed away, which was a blessing for her to now be comfortable and not have to worry and fret with her mental illness or her dementia. And so Grandpa had passed away soon after that. And my mother and her 2 sisters called us over to the house, all the grandchildren, and said, "We want you to choose something off the dining room table that helps keep the spirit of your grandmother alive." And they had set out beautiful ceramic vases, crystal dishes and cups and glasses and goblets, china plates, silverware, beautiful, beautiful things. Well, when I was about 10, my grandmother, and I had no reason to understand why she gave this to me because she always called me the honorest of all the grandchildren, gave me a beautiful china teapot and a little cup and saucer. And so I love them. I still have them to this day. So I looked at the dining room table. I didn't see anything that really was of great interest to me because I had that teapot and that cup and saucer. And by the way, the name of the teapot is Suzanne. I learned that late in life, and that's why I got it, I'm pretty sure. And then the light coming in from the dining room window shot a real glint of light. It bounced off something on the table. And I looked over there, and there was this little tin can over there. And I went over, and I picked this up. I thought, what a curious object. It's all battered. It had been red and gold paisley at one time. It looked like a bank. And it was filled with objects. So I poured those little objects out on the table. And the last thing that tumbled out was a note. And I opened it up. And I could smell it. My grandmother wore a certain face powder, and this was it. And it still has a hint of that smell to it. And her gorgeous handwriting, of course done in real ink in a fountain pen. And I started reading the note, and my heart just throbbed. It was dated 8/4/1950. My last child was born on August the 4th. And I thought, maybe I'm supposed to have this. Maybe this is what it is. So what I would like to do now is read that note to you. My grandmother's words from August 4th. This little bag was given to me by my father's eldest sister on my first birthday. Her name was Letty Peel. These little scissors were also a gift from my mother on my first birthday. And all the years that I cut and sewed clothes for my nickel doll, they were what I used. This little dark thimble is the one I used until I outgrew it. The top, made from a wooden spool, was made by my Uncle Albert the first time he was home from the Navy. I was about 4 or 5 years old. The little shell with a ring at the top, well, that little shell with the ring at the top, my mother put on a piece of watch chain for me as a bracelet when I first started school. My, how I loved it. One way you look at it, it looks like it has hair and a bonnet and 2 eyes. The little card was on a raffia basket that I made when I was in 6A. Now, the reason it says sold is because I had paid for the raffia basket and I could take it home. Otherwise, it belonged to the school. The other little thimble belonged to Clarabelle, my aunt, and then to Sally, my mother. The little flint came from Mooresville with me when I was about 10 years old. Also, the little band ring, which my father made for me. Now, the watch bob your father was wearing for every day. And the one that I gave him for Sunday is in a cigar box upstairs. Love to you all. If you ever want to know what these little treasures are, hope it is years and years before you have to wonder what they are and why I kept them lovingly. Your wife and mother, Ollie Harriet Corliss. The most precious gift that she gave.